Hello, everyone! Survivor Specialist John and McKenna are back to rewind this episode of 45, and I'm excited, sort of. um,
It's such
we're
an
officially
interesting
merged.
episode to get into.
Yeah, yeah, we're officially merged here. So let's dive into the merged tribe name of Dakuwaka.
Dakuwaka, it's so fun to say. Like I saw it. I was actually because they showed it to us. They didn't make like this big ordeal about it. I saw it and I was so excited. I was just like, that's a fun one. I like it.
Yeah. So, it's a Fijian shark deity. We looked it up. And so we kind of want to talk about the tribe names, how, we get a word from the country that they're in. So like, Hai Dai Feng in China, we have the combining of tribe names like Solewa in Healers Hustlers, which we are watching over on the Patreon. It is episode 7, Get to Gettin'. And then we have just like people who play tricks, and like Merlonio and Boston Rob being like, yeah, it was Amber's stuffed animal.
Yeah, and then we have ones that are totally like just thematic with the way the season's going, like Merca.
We could have left that one at the door. So what are your thoughts on the tribe names? Do you like the viewer always likes the tricks, like Dabu, like that's hilarious, Anil Adam. Um, but the kind of country dedication versus the combining the uh tribe names.
I don't really like the portmanteau of tribe names. I think it's really lazy. And it's just like, oh, look, we're all together now, so we should do this. It was just funny because I think some of the best seasons have those as their final merge names, but that's why you always forget those merge names. Uh, I really enjoy the respect the players have when they dig into the like local languages and stuff. Um, I like this one a lot more because it shows like a lot more dedication to it. Maybe I don't know. Maybe someone just read this on like a billboard at the Fiji airport or whatever.
Yeah.
But like it feels better than last season's where it was like 4-4, where they didn't even put in the effort to figure out what 40 was.
Yeah. So I like the combining if it like makes sense. Like you have Shibogamogo. Like that's fun. But then it's just like Solewa, like some of them just fit and like sound sound natural. Like they could be a tribe name. And like Chibogamogo has that same fun mouth sound of Dakuwaka. But then you do have those people that are like, all right, so like let's do something from here. And I feel like it's kind of getting stale now
Mm-hmm.
from be always being in Fiji. Like you had like Vinaka and like a lot of like different words for hello. Like there was a
Yeah.
bunch of just like same tribe names, kind of merged tribe names in a row that were Fijian.
Yeah, but maybe I put that more on. Maybe it's put on production.
Production
Maybe it's put
being
on
Fiji.
players. Well, sure. There's the production in Fiji aspect of it, but there's also this idea that like put in the effort to learn, right? Like it's. I always think of like China when I'm thinking about this because like as far as I know they used to do this. I don't know if they still do it, but Survivor used to provide books or like material to like study up on about the area where they're filming, right? And like China obviously went to the next degree with like the art of war and everything,
Mhm.
which is why I mentioned it. But I think if like we have these resources out there and are encouraging the players to do that, we'll get a little more variety and we'll get more like this. where it's like there's this like Polynesian shark deity, right?
Mhm.
And like
Yeah.
we can dive deeper into Fiji itself rather than just like translating words.
Yeah, I think I do like that it is something not just like for or hello or good in Fijian, that it's like it is something. So like the tribe names are all birds for this
Mhm.
season. So like this has a thing that's like it has something solid to it. Um so it's fun.
I at first, without before looking it up, I was like, it kind of sounds like duck quacking, and that's funny.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Fits into the bird theme. So then we go into Katura and Bruce, and they reminded me instantly of Chris and Dom from Ghost Island.
Mhm. Yeah, I think we are going to look back at this Katura Bruce, and like it wasn't there at first. We were talking about how one sided this rivalry was at first. I think we are now at the point where we are going to be looking back at this as one of those like definitive rivalries in Survivor history.
Mhm. Yeah. So like Chris and Dom is like that main upfront one because it's like definitely between two people. But then you have the Rob versus Russell in Heroes versus Villains where it's more like side based, where you have Russell's girls and Rob's girls plus coach. Um and you just kind of have to like fight and pick the side, and I still don't know what side is going to win, Katura or Bruce, because now with this, move that Katura makes at the end of the episode, is that going to get her further? Like that might give her
It's the big
better
question,
standing
right?
with Bruce because she got Caleb out.
Yeah, yeah. It's a very good question about like how this is going to impact Katura, especially because like there was so much emphasis on the beginning of this episode on this Katura Bruce thing that I thought one of them was going home.
Mhm.
And like maybe that's just like kudos to the editors for really stringing this story log like as long as possible and building it up. I really hope it doesn't fizzle on us. But like again, the merge is a point where we see these type of conflicts like even with like the Chris Noble and Dom that you just said, right? Like that's a merge boot right there.
Yep. Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah, so it's just really interesting that kind of the format of this season kind of prevents this from coming to a head. So it'll be interesting to see how it happens now that it might be open.
Hmm. Um, and Bruce throwing Katura under the bus at at night with all the other Rebas around, and Bruce is like, "So, you know, I know you didn't want Caleb to go." Kind of also like in my mind, they're not the same thing, but Alan Ball when he decided to be like strip idol for the idol, like you have the idol
Mm.
strip. Like it just was like that revealing moment that just didn't need to be public. It didn't need to be out there. It like
But even in this episode of like keeping it with season 35, like this episode that we watched, we have a moment like that where Chrissy is talking to Ben about like their future plans and stuff, and Ben's like, "This is supposed to be a secret alliance. We can't be having this conversation in front of everyone as they're like talking at the merge feast about
yeah.
how they're going to move forward."
So remember, watch Healers Hustlers for the Patreon. Um and so this war between Katura and Bruce shows Bellows cracks, and it's like this kind of more dominant tribe coming into the merge cracking. So you have tribes like Tandang, Galoo, Luvu from new era, where they come into the merge and just kind of crumble a bit.
Yeah, this is like that. This is that classic idea of like the unintentional tandang, as it's been called, right? Like this is that moment where it's like, okay, this tribe has been succeeding for too long, and they just need to turn on each other at this point. They just feel the necessity to do it, and we're really seeing it here. Not so much like actually playing out where they're actually voting each other out, but it's there, and the cracks are forming. And I think this Bello tribe is just going to explode and be like one of the greatest breakdowns in Survivor history at this point.
Yeah, once they can everyone can vote together and only like one person is safe.
Yeah, exactly.
So then we get Kelly talking about Bruce, and it almost feels like a bit of Trish talking about Tony, where, you know, Bruce is good. He's good. Just like, don't worry about him. He's a number. Don't worry about his antics. I've got him under control. Where Trish was kind of the same thing about Tony, trying to get people to be like, he's fine. Don't worry about him. He's with us. We're good.
Yeah, and like this is kind of like that classic pairing. We do get it every once in a while where we have the erratic player, someone like even like going back at Panama, right? Like with Shane, and like
Shane and all of Kasaya, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like they kind of took turns with it, but it's just like reeling him in, keeping him down, like stopping him from getting out there and wild, while at the same time kind of begrudgingly be like, we have to work with this guy because he's our solid number.
Yeah.
But boy, oh boy, how much easier would this game be to play without them?
Yeah, exactly. And we see Kelly say that, like, that Bruce is going to be the death of her in this game. Well, not the death of her, but like is her thorn in her side. Yeah. And then next, Austin gives a confessional that worries the crap out of me because it's that death confessional of, I'm doing great. I'm high on life. I've got all these advantages. Nothing could go wrong. And I'm like, this is the confessional that people say in their boot episode, and then they go home. So automatically I'm like, so Austin's leaving this episode. Like, I've thrown out Bruce. I've thrown out Katurah. Austin's the target this episode.
Yeah, I mean, it's those moments, like we've seen it so many times before. Pretty much any time someone is voted out with an idol in their pocket, right? I'm pretty sure Aubrey had one of these in EOE.
We have Jessica in this episode of HHH. Yeah. She says she's the queen bee once she hits that merged tribe. So, and then we see her fate at the end of this episode.
Yeah, I mean, arguably even like Sarah at Cagayan, right? Where it's the confessional about being in control and in charge. Like, it doesn't have to be related to an advantage. It just has to be this bit of power imbalance where they think that they have more power than they do. And the editors like using it as a haha, joke's on you. You don't understand how the game's going. And this episode feels so different than those because it felt really out of place when Austin's just talking about his idol all of a sudden.
Yeah, exactly. And he's talking about it with Emily, like, oh, you know, you can get an idol if we vote out Kelly. And and Austin's just like, nah, I don't need to right now. But I'm the best. I'm the greatest. I'm doing good. And I was like, this is so out of place. Like, it seemed like they just needed to fit this in, and that we're seeing Austin walk out the door.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of nice. It's kind of nice to show. It's always fun when Survivor does give us a nice helping of hubris here that really, you know, sticks it into some of these players. But it also kind of made this a little more exciting because you weren't sure how Austin was going to behave with the idol because of it, right?
Yeah, we have that. All of a sudden, we have like the Bruce Katurah and then the wrench of Austin, and it's like, where did this come from? Yeah. So before we get to the challenge, we have Bruce sports time with Bruce. Bruce's sports time. And John, do you know what a pick is?
I do know what a pick is.
Granted, it's not the same way it's used in Guatemala, but Bruce is talking about a pick in football to Caleb. And I was just like repeating to myself, does Caleb know what a pick is? Does he know what a pick is? Because of that moment in Guatemala.
This seems so funny because like we get these sport analogies every few seasons in Survivor. Usually it comes from athletes, like the professional athletes who are playing.
Bring back Jimmy
But
Johnson.
Always bring back coach. Come on, bring back the coach. Not coach, the coach. But this is the thing, is like Caleb's Canadian, and while, like Michael Carroll says in the chat here, there is a Canadian Football League, the rules are different than American football, for one thing. And football does not hold the same like respect as it does in the States, right? Like in middle America, you can go to any town on a Friday and know that there's a high school football game you can watch. That doesn't happen in Canada. That's not like that here at all. And it's funny being a Canadian watching this and this conversation. It's like, yes, I know football. I understand what Bruce is saying. But part of me is just like, does Caleb know what Bruce is saying? I expect Caleb. I know Caleb was a basketball player and everything. And he might know football and everything too. I'm not saying that he's naive enough not to know the rules of football,
Caleb
or not at least kind of understand.
Caleb knows the right kind of pick then.
But the more what I'm getting at is, it's funny seeing this type of conversation and then having Caleb comment on it afterwards, being like, this is the worst Survivor conversation I ever had. I wonder how much of that is because it's all football analogies and it's just so like stereotypical of the way Canadians portray Americans.
Well, and it's also like Bruce is talking to him like a dad, and dad's son, sports ball. That's the way I know how to communicate. But now we're going to go into this, like, Bruce is kind of like this enigma to me, where he seems like an old school player, but he's trying to play new school, but he's in the new era. And it's like this, and it's just not working. And it's making him out to be this version of Bruce, where I think he could be a great player if he just like calmed down a sec and like reassessed the situation.
It's kind of like when we were talking on the Patreon last week about Cambodia, and we had Andrew Savage, who was playing like super old school still in Cambodia, which arguably is one of the biggest changes to the strategy of the game. It is responsible for one of the biggest changes in strategy of the game. And it feels like Bruce should be more of an Andrew Savage.
Yes.
Which is a weird thing to say, especially in like a new era.
Where people pre-20.
Yeah. But I think like he needs to take that mentality, and that mentality is a little more respected in the new era, or like in the new era, than it was like in the new school era, because there haven't been tribe swaps and everything, right? It's like staying loyal to your tribe is something that's easy to do when there isn't a bunch of swaps and people aren't intermingling. Even this season, right? Like most of Bellows stayed together.
Right.
And Bruce is kind of preaching it, but at the same time is like willing to cut people immediately. And it's like he's not sticking to the idea which he's proposing at the same time. And granted, we're watching an edit. We don't know exactly what's going on the island, but it feels like Bruce is just like trying to play every type of game of Survivor and see what sticks, rather than just dedicating himself to a single way of playing the game.
Yeah, and that is like new era seems solely numbers based. Like we get the old school is like alliance based, where and then new school is like voting blocks, and then it's just new era, they're numbers. Like they're not even like, I'm not saying that they're not people anymore, but like they're just like kind of, they're pawns. Like it just feels less personable than like old school.
Yeah, and we've seen this type of conversation over and over again, right? Like we see it here where we have like Kelly talking about, well, Bruce is my number, and Jake's talking about Bruce is my number, Caleb's my number. It's that idea of like, who are these people loyal to? Again, it's like loyalty, but it's phrased in a way where it doesn't seem they're emphasizing the loyalty as much anymore.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like number for now, and then they have their expiration date. So we're moving into the challenge. It is a classic Survivor challenge. It is get a grip, and you've got to cling onto a pole. So let's deep dive into when we have seen this challenge before. So we have Vanuatu, which this version actually has ropes on the outside of the pole, so it's more like a ledge than a like indent. Then we have Cook Islands, Tocantins, Heroes versus Villains, a South Pacific duel, a Blood versus Water duel, Worlds Apart, Game Changers, and Winners at War.
Yeah, this is a challenge. Again, we've talked about it a lot over the last couple of seasons, that like these classic challenges we see that we feel like we saw them over and over and over again, and we just didn't. Like, that's not how it works. They were like spaced out just perfectly that we felt like we always saw it over and over again. But it's just our minds playing tricks on us. It's also like, I think when I think about this challenge, I always think of like the Heroes versus Villains version of the challenge, with like the women outlasting, where going into this, Phil mentioned it last night on the podcast, it was like 60% of the times this challenge has been won by men, and like this completely like skewed those numbers.
Yeah, so we have in Vanuatu, we have Twyla, then Ozzy, Tyson, Danielle, Ozzy again, Laura Moret, Joe, Ty, and then Denise and Jeremy.
Yeah, and like that's another thing, is that we've gotten to this point where they are making it so that two people are winning on this challenge as well.
Yeah, but two females boosting up those numbers, where like I feel like you'd almost think that females would win this challenge over males, but when you have Tyson, Ozzy, Joe, they're all kind of like the same archetype of like skinny, fit people.
Yeah.
I think Jeremy's kind of the outlier here.
Yes, but I do recall seeing on Twitter yesterday, I believe, who said, I think Wendell tweeted it yesterday, was that Jeremy's like freakishly mutant toes helped him in the challenge.
Whoa, call back to D then. D and
exactly.
her big toes.
Although D gives credit to her toes, and she's like hugging this thing and has herself wrapped around it.
Well, yeah. So I think that's an interesting strategy that D has, because we really don't see that often. Because when you think this challenge, I think Heroes versus Villains, and Parvati's just like hanging off the side of it using her big toe, and Jerry's just like, Parvati, how are you doing this? She's just like got one arm and just like hanging out.
But like counterpoint, they've made that thing, those ledges, narrower and narrower the longer we go on.
I have noticed that, because the challenge, it was like 10 minutes in and we were down to the final two, and I was like, whoa, hold a second. These people can't last that long. But then I'm like, these footholds do seem a lot smaller.
Yeah, for sure. I do think like wrapping your legs around does give you, like, if you lean back that way, you can kind of lock yourself into position. So I understand where D was coming from.
I feel like the way D was positioned, it wasn't just like fully like this. She kind of had her legs up by like her shoulders almost, and just like sat back into it. So I feel like there was that like friction to it.
Mm-hmm.
So at the challenge, Jeff announces that the first vote is going to be pre-jury, and the second vote will be the first member of the jury. And that is wild to me, because that drastically impacts the vote here. But let's dive into, these people have made the merge, and now based on someone else's merit, they get to make the jury or not. Like, my position in the game is based on Kelly or D lasting longer than the other. And it's like, that kind of sucks too. And I've made the merge, I should be able to make the jury. Like, that is always my thought process.
And it's really interesting, because like when we look at Survivor's past, as we do on this podcast, the first few seasons of Survivor, the jury didn't start until the second vote after the merge, right? Because you have Gretchen, who doesn't make the jury, Varner doesn't make the jury, Clarence, Rob, Roger, Savage, right? So in that like classic era, even Rory in Vanuatu doesn't make it.
I'll give you the full rest of the list. We have Brandon from Guatemala, Nick Stanberry, Joe Dowdle, question mark, because he was medevaced, Corinne, Kelly Remington, Jessica Johnson, here's Healers Hustlers, which we were watching over on the Patreon, and then Dwight.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, right? Like, so it happens every once in a while. It doesn't happen that often. And every time it does happen, it's kind of a point of contention. I mean, obviously, like Karamoan was a big one where Corinne makes the merge, doesn't make the jury, but doesn't even get to sit on stage because of it at the finale.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was other circumstances.
But it's weird. It's an awkward thing to have.
I'm going to talk Borneo here. I'm going to be the one to bring it up. The Gretchen boot is the most wild boot, which we could have had something like that, where like 4 votes cause Gretchen to go home. Like, this is the madness and the chaos that we need for like a merge vote, which we could have had here because we have the Katura versus Bruce versus Caleb versus Seafood. Like, we could have had all 4 of those options be for all of them instead of 2 and 2.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Michael Carroll, once again in the chat, says like this is a 3-2 merge with bad PR, right? Like it's a swap. This is a swap. The awkward thing about this swap is these players are told, hey, you're merged. Start playing as if they're merged. And they're like, psych, try swap.
Yeah, it's kind of almost like we might have mentioned this last season, but Thailand, where they fake merge and they're all living on the same beach, but they have 2 votes that are not merge votes.
Yeah, which is why Thailand is not listed on these like season of like people who make the merge but don't make the jury.
Yeah, exactly. Any other people you want to highlight from the pre-jury list that stood out to you as crazy votes?
I just really want to talk about the fact that like this is one of those things that we see, like again, we saw it a lot in the early seasons and it made sense. But I think as soon as you stop doing that, as soon as they like pull the cork out of the bottle, you can't put it back in. At that point, it feels really bad. And obviously the first one that we get where it is someone who makes the merge and is also the first juror is in All-Stars, a season where they want to have more people around. So it makes sense that they're doing that.
Right.
But then, I mean, we see it in Palau, which I guess technically doesn't have a merge, so maybe it doesn't count.
Right.
But in Cook Islands, the jury starts before the merge, was a whole other issue.
That's a whole nother other issue that we're not getting into.
Exactly. But I think like the thing is like if you've had a chance to play with every player in the game together on a single beach, you should have a chance to vote for a winner at that point, right? I get the argument being like you've had that moment to connect with everyone and you can use it to help figure out who your winner is. It shouldn't just be a popularity contest at that point.
Right.
But
exactly.
And it's just like I'm looking at these like later players that it happened to. Your Corinne's, your Kelly Remington, your Jessica Johnson's, your Dwight, who was just talking about how terrible it was a couple weeks ago on the Predictions and Power Rankings, right? Is like it just feels like you finally accomplished something by making merge, and then you don't make jury, so you're out of there, right? Like you don't even get to stick around for the season. No.
Sifu has like the saddest confessional ever of like, he obviously wanted to play the game to win, but just wanted to make the jury.
Yeah, and it's just like if you get to the point where everyone's on the same beach, you should have a say in the winner. That's just my personal opinion about it. I think it makes people feel better. I think it also like more definitively puts us like a point where it is the accomplishment. I think one of the other things, like if you don't want like there to be a larger jury or whatever, and Phil said this several times over the last couple of weeks, make the merge later. It's that simple.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So now we're going to go to another Survivor first, but it does have some callbacks. So we have this flash forward um, editing with Jake and the way he wants tribal council to work. We see some people's votes. It lays it all out for us in a pretty bow, and we've never seen that before. It's never happened, but it almost is likened to the flashback editing that we got for the first time with David versus Goliath and Dan finding the idol.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like it's that it's an editing technique that's being used here. And when I couldn't stop thinking about it after it happened, I was just like, holy cow, what is this weird thing that's going on here? Why is this happening? As someone who talks about movies a lot, I know these type of storytelling techniques, and it's just something that feels out of place in reality TV because it's like, okay, we're dealing with the hypotheticals. They just showed like the shot of them at tribal council. You're like, okay, obviously the shot happened, and technically these votes could have happened at any time that they're showing them right down.
Mm-hmm.
So like that part of me is kind of fine with it, but at the same time, it's just like this is so foreign. It's like this hypothetical conversation about how things might turn out, and we're seeing it play out in front of us like it's a drama.
Yeah, I mean, we have flashbacks, so why, like, that poses the question, why can't we have flash forwards? And so I actually really liked this editing, but it did tip me off that this is not going to be the way this goes down. That was a big clue for me that this is not how it works. It was a fun moment, but I think it didn't have the right result that they might have wanted, where it was cool and flashy, but it just gave me what was happening at the tribal council.
Exactly. I love it when the editors try something new. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The only way to know is by trying. Like you have to give it a shot.
It also kind of reminds me with, Jeff pulling down the whiteboard and being like, so Jeremy is safe. These people are safe. And then Keith has to talk to Kimmy. And like, it almost gives like that because you're seeing a picture of tribal council and seeing what is going to happen and what should happen.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That is kind of how it feels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's new and fun, but if they do it again, they have to have different results or they have to do it more often. So like maybe another time this season or something to where like we don't expect the outcome when we see it. Like we don't expect it to not work or we don't expect it to work or something to that effect. I don't think we'll see it that much, but
I just don't know if you can work in hypotheticals in reality television. It's just what it comes down to. I think the reason why flashbacks work is because it's a definitive moment that's already happened. They're being let in on it. Whereas, like, we have a lot of discussion about hypotheticals in these shows. Are we flash forwarding for all of them? Only if the footage exists, right? Like, and that's where it gets awkward because part of what makes reality television so fascinating is the fact that anything could happen. So when it's in a way where it's like, no, this definitively happens, it kind of takes out a lot of it. It's not like you're like, okay, you're probably wondering how we got here moment, right?
Right. Exactly. So we then get to Drew of him leaving his bag at Reba camp, but he's at Lulu now for the vote.
What a rookie mistake. Like, from my understanding, I think Chrissy tweeted this yesterday. They tell you, like, make sure you bring your bag every time you go to a challenge. And she didn't. And that was dumb.
I would always bring my bag anywhere. Challenge, tribal council, we see it time and time again of people forgetting, stuff at camp. Then you have the whole like, here, I brought your hat back kind
Yeah.
of moments, or, Rupert forgetting absolutely everything. But we really have the callback of Matt from last season forgetting his shot in the dark and then going home.
Yeah. And it's just so funny that the way like this season worked out with recording is the last episode they saw was the episode before that happened.
Yeah, exactly. So Drew didn't have that in his mind of don't forget your bag, don't forget your bag. And this split tribal council where they go to this other beach.
Yeah. It'll be really interesting. Keep an eye on Drew at challenges from now on. See if he has his bag.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure he will.
So that's it for this episode of 45. But tune into the Patreon tomorrow where we are watching Heroes, Healers, Hustlers, Season 35, Episode 7, Get to Getting.
Yeah, it's actually a really good, interesting episode when you compare it to this one, where it's like a true merge vote. It gives a lot of comparison. There's a lot of good things to talk about in that episode,
Yeah.
and hopefully you $10 patrons and $20 patrons are listening in. Speaking of patrons, the Patreon kind of had a bit of an overhaul this week. There's a lot more information on there now about how things are going to shape up come January. Phil has been putting in a lot of work to make sure that we are making even more content for every one of our patrons. The $1 tier is going away, but the $5 tier is getting so much more content, and it is going to be so much more worth it because of it. As always, check out Phil and Alexa after every episode. Phil's after show is up on the Patreon for $20 patrons. McKenna and I will be there for you $10 and $20 patrons with our recap of Heroes, Healers, Hustlers tomorrow.
So Cena and I will be back soon with the Amazing Race for you $10 and $20 patrons.
And this Sunday, Phil and Alexa are going to be joined by Sammy from season 43 for the power rankings and predictions. It's going to be really great. These 43 cast has been fantastic to have so far this season. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to them musing on all of these week-to-week going-ons. And Sammy's someone that Phil and Alexa have been wanting to get on the podcast for a long time. So it'll be really good. McKenna, anything else?
Nope. That's all I have for this week. And stay tuned for next week. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Watch Heroes, Healers.